At the time of Dominick Cruz's reign as a bantamweight champion, he remained on the top with his infamous footwork and his style that was ahead of his time as he dominated the division. He eventually met defeat at the hands of Cody Garbrandt, and following that, he lost to Henry Cejudo. That's just the name of the game. You're on top and everyone's eyes are on you, studying your style and catching up. When Cruz fought Kenney, we saw Cruz secure a victory once again, but there was something really fascinating about what happened this time around. Dominick Cruz has made some adjustments to his fighting style. He still applies the same principles of fighting that make him such a difficult fighter to face, but now he's taken lessons that he's learned from the past and actually improved his game. We'll be looking at Cruz's adjustments, the tactics he's using, breaking down the story of the fight, and we'll look at the end some important things about his technique. I'll leave a timestamp in case you want to see certain moves, but because I know you're a Chad, you're totally going to watch the video. But in all seriousness, there's a lot of principles of fighting I'll be covering here, and I think you'll be able to find a lot of this stuff useful. Let me start off by reminding you of Dominick Cruz's signature feint. This feint is a move Cruz refers to as a slide, and in short it works as a feint on the opponent, but I'll let Cruz describe it to you for a bit.
He does throw it, that shuts down that right hand and allows me to throw mine. I slide to the outside of it, and because my feints are not getting him to throw the punch when I want, I'm able to throw my punch once I feint and realize he's not biting on him. Now I can be offensive. Bink, there it is.
To recap this, Cruz explains that he uses this to read the opponent. When you feint the opponent and nothing happens, they become comfortable and start to do nothing with the feints because they don't perceive it as a threat, and this dulls the opponent's sense of defensive rhythm and opens them up to other shots. Now Cruz will regularly do this and attack right when the opponent becomes comfortable with his feints. For example, Cruz will use a slide at angle on Faber and then notices that he doesn't react, and then when he sees that, he does it again and then goes for the attack. Cruz has a ton of versions of this technique to use various attacks. I won't cover it here, but you can see more of his craft from the links I'll leave in the description if you want to know more. I want to get to the main points here and mention that when Cruz uses the slide, a lot of his weight is on the back leg. With most of the weight on his back leg, this allows him to bail out in case the opponent tries to advance on him. For example, against Faber, he would slide to bait a reaction and then bail out real quick to punish the reaction. And since most of the weight's on the back foot, escaping is really easy since he can move away. But there are some problems with this feint style. The bounce puts a lot of stress on your legs because you're bouncing with too much weight and your distribution is off on one side. And if you're drilling this repeatedly, you could potentially cause some wear and tear. And then another issue is that you're putting yourself in a very committed position where it's hard to respond if the opponent actually manages to advance on you. For example, against Cody Garbrandt, when Cruz attempted to slide, Cody was actually able to close that gap in time and land his shots. And because Cruz is in such a compromised position, it was hard for him to do something. With all of the weight on the back foot and his feet not properly grounded, Cruz had a hard time responding to counters until he could reset his position. This meant Cody could land shots during the small window as Cruz played catch-up to reset. One last technical disadvantage came from what we saw with Henry Cejudo. When Cruz slides, he puts a lot of weight on the one side, and what that means is that he won't be able to check the kick, since he needs his weight more evenly distributed between both his legs. That way he can lift his leg up and block, like this image. And here you're gonna notice that Cruz has too much weight on the rear foot, making it impossible for him to properly check the kick. In Cruz's fight with Casey, Cruz actually abandoned his feint style almost entirely, which is interesting because he built a lot of his offense off of this kind of feint. He switched over to using a more efficient feint that relies less on committed movement. After fighting some of the fastest fighters in the division like Cody Garbrandt and Henry Cejudo, it was probably a good idea to adjust a little bit to ensure that he doesn't get punished for feinting. And this is where the stepping feint comes in. Cruz will often step forward to feint and read the opponent. If the opponent advances on him, Cruz is in a much better position to reply back since his feet is more evenly distributed. You'll even notice that he's using low commitment feints that allow him to respond quickly, even to leg kicks. After his fight with Cejudo, leg kicks seemed like a viable option to deal with Cruz's movement, so it was interesting to see how Cruz would deal with this. In this fight, Cruz seemed more keen to dealing with the leg kicks, often moving away from them, baiting them out to punish the kicks, and even countering them accordingly. He was in much better position overall to handle the kicks by being able to lift the leg, Sometimes you'd see him lift a leg and ride the force of the kick and reply back with counters. There are certain situations where he's still susceptible to kicks, as we saw when Casey was able to punish him off of Cruz's own kicking attempts, but they didn't appear to be the defining aspect of the fights that dictated who was in control. Cruz had a lot of unique offensive methods when using the slide, but ever since leaving it behind, we didn't get to see some of the same tactics. But this is a game of give and take. Even though Cruz didn't use his slide as much, we start to see him incorporating other forms of attacks instead, like kicking. In his fight with Casey, he would use kicks a lot more this time. We saw him use more head kicks and other combinations with kicks like the roundhouse into his power hand, similar to what Adesanya does. I do have to mention that Cruz tends to throw his strikes in a very looping way, so his strikes aren't always as accurate as someone like Adesanya, who chooses his strikes very carefully. Cruz does mix it up, and he doesn't just throw to the body, he'll also throw leg kicks and then follow up with the power hand too. Cruz was using the kicks to feed Casey a lot of different angles to worry about by going low, going high, and switching to kicks and punches. A sub of mine mentioned this, and I also noticed this too from watching Faraz Sahabi's podcast, but he mentioned that if he wants to work with Cruz, he would actually get him to use kicks more, especially head kicks. It makes a lot of sense because Cruz is tall for the division and his sense of rhythm is really good, so expanding this into his kicking game would open up more offensive opportunities into his approach. However, after studying the fight, my honest assessment is that we didn't get to see the full extent of what Cruz could achieve by incorporating more kicks. And this has more to do with the fact that Casey did a really good job of denying Cruz from building any kind of reads or rhythms with the kicks, because he would immediately punish Cruz's legs or counter back as soon as Cruz threw the kicks. Once Cruz got kicked in the leg, it disrupted his own ability to build off his own kicking rhythm. Cruz's style is largely based on attacking the opponent and denying them the chance to attack back. He'll often pop his attack and move away. He doesn't stay on the inside too long to work combos unless he finds the right opportunity to pull it off. We saw a lot of Cruz's signature attack where he'll throw the power shot, shift his feet up, and escape outside the side door. Throws power shot, he's going to shift his rear foot up, and this is important because it squares your feet up so that you can move sharply in another direction since your feet are aligned to move in that linear direction. Cruz will either exit left or exit right, making it hard for them to predict where he's going. When he exits right, Cruz is going to throw his power hand, then he's going to shift his rear foot up. Then instead of moving to his left, he can actually weave under the attack angle and then move right instead. And then he heads over in that direction. On commentary, Justin Gaethje's coach, Trevor Whitman, he mentions that the squared stance allows him to move in either direction, left or right, to escape. And you can see why shifting his feet after attacking allows him to achieve this. Casey did exploit Cruz doing this a few times, and this is because Cruz moves his head so low, he potentially risks his head getting locked in a standing guillotine. Casey was able to sink in the guillotine a few times when Cruz put his head out the side door while being too close to Casey's arm. One very important principle in fighting is to be unpredictable. This often means you don't repeat the same patterns to avoid the opponent figuring out your own pattern. A nice rule of thumb to consider is that for every offensive technique you have, it's a good idea to have different iterations of that technique so the opponent can effectively adjust to it. For example, TJ Dillashaw, he uses the switch foot technique, and then from here he can switch from doing a switch cross takedown, a switch cross head kick, or just a switch cross to angle off. This makes it hard to predict what is actually coming. In Cruz's case, when he actually uses his side door escape, he doesn't always escape the side door. Sometimes he'll actually weave under and throw the power shot, and this is where the next signature move comes in. Here Cruz is going to throw his power shot, shift his feet up, but instead of escaping the side door, he's actually going to weave under his center line to avoid the opponent's attack, and then he's going to throw his own hook again. This is why it's important to have multiple iterations of a single look, so when Cruz does his power shot and shifts forward, it's going to be hard to tell if he's going to escape the side door or weave under to snap that power shot. This is actually really similar to the tactic Justin Gaethje used against Tony Ferguson. Gaethje throws his power hand, he shifts his stance forward, and then he follows up, weaving under the center line to throw his power shot. So this tactic is a bait setup where Cruz will anchor his head off low to the side. He tries to get the opponent's advance on that position, and since his head is low, they're likely to jab or strike low and leave openings. So Cruz will typically wait for the opponent to advance forward and then pop up with his shot to move his head away from that bait position. It's kind of a cool thing to see, but it wasn't something I saw a lot of consistency with. Casey had a lot of good moments too, replying to Cruz's kicks by returning with his own leg kicks, capitalizing on the guillotine when Cruz gave up that position to escape the side door. He found success at throwing off Cruz's rhythm, but on the most part, I didn't see many specific strategies he was using to consistently favor a victory. I do like his use of the knees though, because Henry Cejudo used those perfectly to drop Cruz, and it continues to be an effective tool. Cruz uses a lot of head movement to advance forward, so he runs the risk of getting his head caught with the knee. Even if you miss the head, the body will be there to take the shot. It's easy to say, but it's not easy to pull off. Cruz generally likes to feint a lot and probe to read the reaction first, so he can easily bait out the knee. And this is what makes Cejudo's knee so unique. Cruz tried baiting out the reactions, but Henry Cejudo didn't bite on them until Cruz actually advanced forward, and then that's when Henry Cejudo landed the knee. Other than that, this was a vintage Dominick Cruz fight where we saw him use a lot of the same principles that's brought him success throughout his career, like sticking and moving, never staying comfortable against the cage, using misdirection to circle away, and mixing up his wrestling to open up shots when disengaging. Towards the final round, Cruz mentioned Casey started to put on more pressure.
He came out in the third, I felt his pressure, but his offensive pressure wasn't there, if that makes sense. He's pushing forward, but it wasn't forward with combinations and technique. It was forward with the sake of moving forward to not look like he's losing moving back. And so I was able to use that to create some openings, take down opportunities, and land some right hands and some combinations.
Cruz mentioned he used the pressure against him by landing various attacks, and one of them was his signature pivot back hook. To explain how this works, Cruz is going to pivot his body back by stepping his lead foot back, then he's going to adjust his rear foot by stepping out laterally. What this does is it removes your body from the danger zone so you could counter the opponent falling into your range, highlighted in this blue square. This also adjusts your body so you can open up new angles to attack if they move to your weak side. And here Cruz moves over, TJ enters his new spot, and then Cruz opens up the new angles to attack the new side. This works really well against aggressive fighters who really push to commit forward, since you could evade the attack while attacking them at a new angle. The main issue of this technique is that it's very situational, since it's mostly effective against fighters aggressively moving forward. If a fighter comes in passively with low commitment, you're committing a lot of energy at movement into a counter and you may not land it. This makes the counter really inefficient to use. This is why this counter didn't work well against Casey in the earlier rounds when Casey came in passively. It wasn't until the final round when he picked up the pressure that Cruz was able to land this against him, and he was able to be more consistent with this counter shot. In the end, Cruz managed to finish strong by finishing the round with a good takedown. Here Cruz is going to shoot for a double leg, and then Casey's going to change his level, go for overhooks. And what Casey's going to do is he's going to pull his posture up to defend the takedown. And then while he's pulling Cruz up, what Cruz is going to do is take his right hand, then change the position to go up with Casey's force. And then he's actually going to change to a knee tap instead, and he takes his other hand and brings it right behind the knee, and now he's moving in the same direction that Casey was resisting, and he manages to get the takedown. And from there, Cruz was pretty much able to sit in his guard scoring to ultimately win that round. Okay, it's time to address the elephant in the room. Dominick Cruz's footwork and IQ is pretty amazing. There is one objectively fair criticism I've seen about his technique time and time again. It's a pretty wild technique. It's not the most textbook form you'll see. So what I'm going to do here is to share with you the pros and cons of throwing the way that Cruz does and throwing it in the more textbook method. Let's take a look at his body shot, for example. When Cruz does his body shot, he overextends his head far past his lead foot. When he throws it, his head moves far off center first, but the movement actually telegraphs his intentions very early. What this means is that you have more time to respond to the body shot, and in the fight, Casey would regularly respond by moving or defending it. The reason for this is because when Cruz does his body shot, he first dips his level, then he throws his head off center while throwing his shot. There's a lot of moving parts in the sequence, and when you dip, the opponent knows something is about to happen down low, and the next moving part is his head moving far off center, and this is a secondary giveaway. The more textbook way to throw the body shot is to drop your weight while bending at the knees and spreading your feet apart. By spreading the feet apart, you could drop your level without having to extend the body past your lead foot. Another benefit to this is that you could actually throw the cross while dipping your level at the same time. When you do this at the same time, it gives the opponent less time to react because you're not doing things in different sequences. You're doing it in one sequence. In Cruz's style, when he throws a cross or the body shot, he first dips and then he doesn't quite fire the cross until he takes the head off the center. That added sequence of taking the head off the center telegraphs the shot a little earlier because the cross doesn't quite fire when he drops the level, so you don't see that execution of the dip and the body shot at the same time. There's a little bit of a delay. There's some benefits to what Cruz does too. His head is so far off center that punching him would be nearly impossible. Another benefit is that it makes it a little bit easier to transition into takedowns, so you're putting yourself closer to the opponent's hips. When using a more textbook style of throwing the body shot, you can keep your spine erect and not extending your upper body past your lead foot. You actually have two benefits of doing this. First, this lets you combo into lead hook more fluently because you're not having to travel far back up to your neutral stance like you would if you were to throw your head far off center. In this example, when Cruz does his body shot, if he were to follow up with a lead hook, he would have to travel all the way back up to his neutral stance. If you spend less time committing your head away from your center line, you could actually fluently chain into a lead hook a lot faster afterwards. Here, as I throw the body cross, I actually dip at the very last moment, and then you'll notice that I don't have to travel that much to go back to my neutral stance if I wanted to follow up with the lead hook. I'm just moving straight up, and this allows me to keep my guard up in place also while I'm doing it. The secondary benefit is that you have a little bit more defensive protection. When you dip the level, you can actually throw your strike straight. This allows partial protection to the chin, because the shoulders are raised up to cover the lower half of the jaw. You still have the upper area open, but that's at the hard part of the head, and not the most vulnerable part where the base of the chin is. Do keep in mind that if you're going to commit past your lead foot, you're likely going to have a tendency to strike downwards. And when you do that, you kind of surrender the shoulders from protecting the chin. So you risk moments like this where Cruz aims down and he gets caught on the way back up. For Cruz, one of the issues he had was that he would occasionally get caught after resetting from throwing a body shot, and that's likely due to overextending past his lead foot. This does highlight why you can benefit from keeping that spine straight up so you can retain the integrity of your guard. When you bend over past your lead foot, your arm is likely to stay down on the other side to act as a counterbalance, but you do risk taking shots. One of the dangers is that the opponents can time a head kick right when you throw the body shot, and this could catch your head. But if you keep the spine straight up, you have a better ability to keep the guard up because your weight isn't distributed unevenly, allowing you to keep the guard in place if you really need to. Most fighters could get away with throwing the body shot with no guard just fine, and this is because fighters like Cruz have a good understanding of pattern recognition. He spends a lot of time feinting, reading the opponent so that he could throw his shots. They're very calculated shots, so it makes it hard for people to plot to head kick him. And it's okay if you're not perfect as long as you understand what kind of rhythm is taking place. Even I find myself shuffling my guard occasionally, going for the body cross. We're only human after all, unless you're Lomachenko. This analysis is more to give martial artists the pros and cons of different methods. Absorb what is useful, discard what is not. It's important to keep in mind that Cruz will often violate so many textbook ways of throwing punching techniques, but he understands the core principles of the execution, and that's why Cruz can get away with what he does. He understands the rhythm, he understands the distancing that allows him to get away with that because he knows the opponent's patterns and knows the angles where the opponents can't hit him. And I'll show you an example of this. So Cruz is going to come in and throw his power shot, but he chambers it right from his waist with no guard. It's very unconventional, but he can get away with it because he understands his head positioning. His head is always in a spot where the opponent can't really reach those angles. What exactly did we learn here? We're seeing Cruz become more efficient with his feinting, giving up less opportunities to the opponent. We're not seeing him use a slide as much because it made it hard for him to check kicks. It's possible that he could use a slide again if he's fighting the right opponent, but I could definitely see how he benefited from not using it here as much. We're also seeing adaptations of different kicking applications to replace some of the things that he's not using anymore. And this is a testament to Cruz's intelligence and his ability to adapt as the time goes on. That's why Cruz is such a fascinating fighter to watch. He knows his weaknesses and doesn't sit around waiting for people to take advantage of it. He's not the type of fighter you should expect to stay stagnant. He will adjust if needed, and that's why it's always worth watching him. He's never really lost a rematch fight before, and that's why I'd really like to see him rematch one of his defeats one day, just out of curiosity of knowing how he would change it up. I have a ton of articles written breaking down his fighting style from several years back, so if you want to understand more about his craft, I'll leave links in the description for you to check those out. But do keep in mind that fighters are always redefining themselves and adjusting their styles from what we've seen here. So a lot of my older works, they might become antiquated, so don't be afraid to check out any updates I put out in the future to give you an updated sense of the fighter's craft.